Coming up on The World Today. North Korean leader vows to build invincible military, says US and South Korea are threatening peace. UK lawmakers fought the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Plus, the Greek island of Crete shaken by a 6.4 magnitude earthquake. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shobowale. We begin in North Korea, where leader Kim Jong-un has vowed to build an invincible military in the face of what he says are hostile policies from the United States and a military buildup in South Korea. The North Korean leader says that weapons development is for self-defense and did not want to start a war. Mr. Kim made the comments at a rare defense exhibition while flanked by a variety of large missiles. North Korea has recently tested what it claims to be new hypersonic and anti-aircraft missiles. The South, meanwhile, has recently tested its own submarine-launched weapon. The United States has said it's willing to hold diplomatic talks at any time with North Korea. Pyongyang has said it's not interested as long as Washington maintains policies such as sanctions and military activities in South Korea. Well, let's check in on the aftermath of the elections in Iraq. Chief observer of the EU's observing mission says the early 2021 parliamentary election was generally well managed and calm. Mentions that the low voter turnout among some of its shortcomings. Initial election results on Monday showed Shiite Muslim cleric Muqtada al-Sadr's party as the biggest winner, increasing the number of seats he holds in parliament. Sunday's election was held several months early in response to mass protests in 2019 that toppled a government and showed widespread anger against political leaders who many Iraqis say have enriched themselves at the expense of the country.
The EU Election Observation Mission assesses that the early 2021 parliamentary elections were technically well managed, they were competitive, and a largely calm campaign enabled voters to make an informed choice. In response to demands of the mass Tishreen protest, these elections were held under a new electoral system. Voters were able to freely express their will. Party agent and domestic citizens observers were present in the vast majority of polling stations, and voting procedures were largely followed. The overall conduct of the voting was rated positively in 95% of the polling stations visited by our observers.
The VOA's Heather Murdoch is in Erbil, Iraq. She joins us now for more on this. Heather, what's to blame for the low voter turnout seen in this election?
We spoke to many people who are not voting in the election on election day and before and after. And a lot of them simply said they didn't want to vote because they didn't think it would make any difference. Iraq has been holding elections for 18 years now, since the initial U.S. invasion in 2003. And every time an election comes along, as the people told us, it seems like the same parties are running the same faces and the same political battles between them, but the same corruption and ineffectual government ensues each time. So a lot of people didn't vote for that reason. Other people said that after all, especially the protesters from 2019 and 2020 that you mentioned, some of them said they wouldn't vote because they felt it was almost a crime against Iraq to justify these elections by voting. They say that a lot of people sacrificed their lives and their safety for what they wanted to become a new, better, more democratic Iraq, and that these earlier elections didn't even come close to what they were hoping for.
With this announcement of Muqtada's party's win, how are Iraqis and other parties reacting?
There's a great variety of reaction. I mean, of course, Muqtada al-Sadr is very popular. He didn't win by accident. He is a cleric, as you know, not a politician. So this gives him an elevated popularity in this deeply religious country. There also are parties, other Shia parties, that are claiming that this victory is a fraud, and they're demanding that there'll be an investigation into this election. Still, there are others that a lot of people, especially people I've spoken to that voted for more of the independent parties, will say that they, like others, don't mind or even support Muqtada al-Sadr's main message, which is often about independence from the influence of the United States and Iran. But a lot of the people that are critics of al-Sadr say that they don't believe that he's really that independent. It's just that this platform gains him popularity.
Okay, before I let you go, what would you say are the other notable trends seen in this election?
There is one positive thing I believe that came out of this election is the implementation of new election laws. So some of these election laws allow more independent parties to run, and also change the way people are elected. So on one hand, more independent parties are running. On the other hand, people are running for office in their own areas, as opposed to the old way where the voters were voting for a list, for basically a party, not individuals in their representing their area. The people from those independent parties we spoke to and their supporters said they did not expect a huge win in this election, and they didn't have that. But what they did say is that any small victories they get from this election, they're hoping to transform into, over the years and in the future, larger victories for independent parties.
All right, then, VOA's Heather Murdoch, thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
And over in Lebanon, the probe into the Beirut port explosion has been suspended after two former ministers facing charges lodged a new legal complaint against the lead investigator. The development came moments after Judge Tariq Batar issued an arrest warrant for ex-finance minister Ali Hassan Khalil after he did not show up for questioning. The blast in August 2020 was one of the biggest non-nuclear explosions on record, which killed more than 200 people and devastated large parts of Beirut. The probe was suspended in late September on the basis of a complaint questioning Batar's impartiality. A court rejected the complaint on procedural grounds, allowing him to continue. The UN Human Rights Office is calling for a prompt, impartial and independent investigation into the use of disappropriation force by Libyan authorities against migrants and asylum seekers. UN rights spokesperson Martha Hurtado says armed forces in Tripoli began a series of mass arrests a week earlier, detaining more than 4,000 people in overcrowded detention centers. On Sunday, hundreds of migrants and refugees were waiting outside a United Nations center in Tripoli to seek help in leaving Libya after what aid groups called a violent crackdown.
We call on the authorities to establish prompt, thorough, impartial, and independent investigations into the claims of unnecessary and disproportionate use of force, including the allegations of killings by the security forces and affiliated groups, with a view to hold those responsible accountable. Victims have the right to justice and reparations. We also call on the Libyan authorities to release all arbitrarily detained migrants and asylum seekers, cease their raids on their settlements and halt evicting them, as well as stop criminalizing them. We encourage the authorities to reform the legislation to decriminalize irregular entry, stay and exit of people.
The EU's High Representative Josep Borrell says the bloc will give a firm answer to a ruling by Poland's top court challenging the primacy of its law. Poland's constitutional tribunal ruled last week that parts of EU law were incompatible with the country's constitution, undermining the central tenet of European integration and fueling talk that Poland could one day quit the 27-nation EU. Asked during a Ukraine-EU summit how the EU would respond to the Constitutional Tribunal's ruling, Mr. Borrell said the answer will be a firm answer.
The Commission will use all capacities in order to face a situation that could be considered a strong infringement of the European treaties. Because one thing is clear, when you become member of the European Union, you accept the primacy of the European law over the national law. Otherwise, the European Union could not work as a union. The answer will be a firm answer. So it has to be clear. You are a member of a club, you have to abide by the rules of the club. And the most important rule of the club is that European law is over national laws. Member states are free to do bilateral agreements on specifically the sector of energy. So as far as I know, there is nothing illegal nothing that goes against European law.
Some updates from the COVID-19 pandemic now. A report by MPs in the UK says the country's failure to do more to stop COVID-19 spreading early in the pandemic was one of the worst ever public health failures. Here's more on this and other developments from around the world on our COVID-19 Global Update.
A major report by MPs criticizes the UK's early response to the outbreak, saying big mistakes were made. It says the late lockdown in early 2020 ranks as one of the most important public health failures the UK has ever had. The report also says many thousands of care home deaths could have been avoided. But the MPs commend the vaccine program and rollout as one of the best in the world. Over in Russia, the country has reported 973 pandemic-related deaths, its highest single-day death toll since its start. It also recorded 28,119 new infections in the space of 24 hours. The Kremlin has blamed the rising case numbers on insufficient numbers of people getting vaccinated. Although Russia was fast to develop and launch its Sputnik vaccine when the pandemic struck last year, only around a third of the population have been inoculated. Long queues that last through the night have become a common sight for Indians trying to get a vaccine in one of the country's poorest and remotest districts of West Bengal. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government has said it aims to inoculate 950 million eligible adults with at least one dose by the end of this year. Around 690 million adults have received their first shot, with vaccine supplies picking up from a sluggish pace in the first half of the year. The World Health Organization says it's awaiting full clinical data on the antiviral pill made by Merck & Co. Incorporated to treat mild to moderate COVID-19 patients. It comes a day after the company said it had applied for U.S. emergency use authorization.
Indeed, this is an interesting development, and we yet have to see the full data about it. If it holds true, then it is another weapon in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. And let's not forget all the other weapons we have, and it's always important to remind. So drugs and vaccines are important.
According to data released this month, the drug molnupiravir cut the rate of hospitalization and death by 50% in a trial of mild to moderately ill patients who had at least one risk factor for the disease.
Still to come on the program. A Bosnian innovator builds a rotating house to give his wife better views. That's in a moment. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Still on the COVID-19 pandemic, Rwanda, Senegal and South Africa could be potential locations for Moderna's planned vaccine factory in Africa. That's according to the U.S. drug maker's co-founder and chairman as it steps up its search for a site on the continent. Moderna said last week it would build a plant in Africa to produce up to 500 million doses of vaccines a year.
I won't characterize what the FDA is doing as a delay, because if it was delayed, we would know about it, and they have not told us that. I think that they are sequencing decisions and evaluations based on what they consider to be the urgency of the need, and they've considered the booster decisions more urgent, so there will be a meeting in a couple of days during which their advisory committee will discuss both the booster doses from Moderna and the mix and match data that they've developed from the NIH as to giving a Moderna shot to, for example, a J&J recipient or a Pfizer recipient. That data is forthcoming. So that is.
To other stories now, the Greek island of Crete has been hit by a 6.4 magnitude earthquake with the epicenter near the eastern tip. Some buildings were damaged and thousands of people were seen leaving their homes in panic. There are so far no reports of casualties. Greece's Institute of Geodynamics put the epicenter slightly further east in the sea and said it was a 6.3 quake. Tremors were felt across several of its islands. Crete was hit last month by a 5.8 magnitude quake, which killed one and caused damage. Police say at least 28 people have been killed and many others injured in a bus crash in northwest Nepal. The vehicle was traveling through Mugu district when it left the road and plunged down a hillside shortly after midday. The cause of the crash is unclear, but some reports suggest the bus may have had an issue with its brakes failing. The police say an investigation is underway. Road accidents are not uncommon in the country and are usually caused by bad roads or poorly maintained vehicles. Now, Britain's Prince Charles has advocated clean energy and an end to coal-fired plants during a speech given to the COP15 Biodiversity Summit. At the same summit, Chinese President Xi Jinping announced the launch of a $232.47 million fund to support biodiversity protection in developing countries as talks continue on a new post-2020 global pact to tackle species loss.
To accelerate our efforts further, properly pricing carbon would immediately catalyze the green economy while supercharging climate and biodiversity outcomes. At the same time, supporting governments in their work to reorientate perverse economic subsidies, financial incentives and regulations from those that do harm to those that do good would have a transformative effect on our market systems. In this regard, I would like to applaud the recent commitments by many world leaders to end the investment in coal-fired power stations. As a critical step, and as we rapidly scale up renewables and hydrogen, it is essential that in the meantime, we deploy the latest carbon capture, use and storage technology in order to help us buy precious time by capturing harmful emissions until a full transition is possible.
Alex Sharma, the president of the upcoming United Nations COP26 Climate Change Conference, says the G20 group of leading economies must come forward with more ambitious 2030 climate action plans. COP26, which begins on October the 31st, aims to secure more ambitious action from the nearly 200 countries that signed the 2015 Paris Agreement to limit global warming to well below 2.0 degrees Celsius.
1.5 degrees, that at 1.1 degrees warming, the effects are already alarming. And every fraction of a degree makes a difference. At 1.5 degrees warming, 700 million people will be at risk of extreme heat waves. At 2 degrees, it will be 2 billion. At 1.5 degrees, 70% of the world's coral reefs die. At 2 degrees, they're all gone. temperatures continue to rise, we will step through a series of one-way doors, and the end destination of which is climate catastrophe. And that is why countries in the front line of climate change fought so hard for the 1.5 degree temperature limit to be enshrined in the Paris Agreement. For them, 1.5 to stay alive is not a hollow slogan. It is a matter of survival.
Meanwhile, for climate activist Greta Thunberg, success at the upcoming UN climate conference will come only if world leaders honestly admit that their action is not living up to their words. The COP26 summit is billed as the last big chance for leaders to announce firm targets to cut climate warming industrial emissions this decade. Thunberg says she will probably go to the conference, but expects to be disappointed once again.
The Paris Agreement, or I think as it is now, we are so far behind of what would be needed. We are so far away from anything that would be even close to being in line with the Paris Agreement or staying below 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. So I think what would be a success, what I would consider to be a success, would be honesty, that we highlight the gap between what we are saying and what we are actually doing. I think that's what's needed. In order for us to confront this, to change things, we need to come to terms with where we are actually at. We need to understand the situation and sit down and just trying to understand where we are, because that's not what we are doing now. We are trying to find concrete, small solutions that are symbolic in order to make it seem like we are doing anything, without actually confronting any of the problem at all. We are still not counting all the emissions when we are announcing targets. We are still using creative accounting when it comes to emission cuts, and so on. So as long as that's the case, then we will not get very far.
And finally on the programme, seeking to please his wife, who had wished for a more diversified view from their family house, a Bosnian self-taught innovator has built a rotating house, allowing her to watch a rising sun in one moment and passes by in the next. Borjan Kusic says the house can make a full circle in 24 hours at its slowest speed, while a full turn takes only 22 seconds at its fastest speed.
As you wish. Even the entrance itself. So if you see unwanted guests coming, turn the entrance to the other side.
Well, as the saying goes, happy wife, happy life. And that's the programme today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Tenyola Shoboale.